Snow fell upon Evermere Hall like scattered pearls, whispering against the tall windows as though afraid to disturb the music within. Beneath chandeliers that trembled with gold light, the winter ball unfolded, a glittering sea of silk and laughter. Yet at the top of the grand marble stairwell, where the light dimmed into shadow, stood Lady Evelina Harcourt, watching the world that had once been hers move on without her. A year had passed since her disgrace. A year since the Duke of Ashbourne had vanished from her life without explanation, leaving behind nothing but silence and whispers. Society had been merciless. The invitations ceased. The smiles turned brittle. Ladies who once praised her now discussed her in doorways, and gentlemen bowed to her with the kind of politeness reserved for the fallen. But tonight, Evelina had returned. She had come not for forgiveness, for London rarely granted that, but for proof that she could endure its cruelty without flinching. Her gown, pale ivory with a modest scattering of pearls, shimmered faintly beneath the candles. Her chin was lifted, though her gloved hands tightened on the balustrade. She told herself she felt nothing, and she almost believed it until the orchestra paused mid-waltz and the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened. He had arrived. The Duke of Ashbourne stepped into the light, like a ghost returning to claim the living. His presence rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, fans stilled, and conversation fractured into murmurs. He was broader than she remembered, his dark hair touched with the faintest silver at the temples, his expression carved in the cold composure of a man unaccustomed to forgiveness. For one fragile heartbeat, their eyes met across the room. 1,000 unspoken words seemed to tremble between them. Then, as though recalling the weight of society's gaze, he bowed. Not warmly, not indifferently, simply, precisely, as a duke might bow to a lady whose name had once been linked to his and must now be treated as a stranger's. Evelina's curtsy was equally precise, yet something in her movement, the faint tremor in her wrist, the shallow rise of her breath, betrayed the storm beneath her calm. Around them, whispers gathered like mist. Is that her? The one he jilted? They say she followed him across London. Letters, please. Hush, not so loud. He can hear you. The violins resumed, fragile and uncertain. Evelina descended the stairwell with quiet dignity, each step echoing the memory of the night he'd left her waiting there, the night her father's debt, her ruined prospects, and his silence had sealed her exile. As she reached the ballroom floor, she found herself face to face with Lady Cressida Vale, all powder and pearls, her smile too sharp to be kind. My dear Lady Harcourt, Cressida cooed, what courage to show yourself again. One might almost mistake you for unscathed. I have merely accepted that time mends all wounds, Evelina replied, voice even. Does it? Cressida's fan snapped shut with a soft click. Then perhaps the Duke's absence was merely a healing gesture. How noble of him. Evelina inclined her head, the ghost of a smile at her lips. Then we must both thank him. He seems to have healed half of London. A ripple of laughter passed through those listening, light as perfume but edged with venom. Cressida's eyes hardened. Evelina walked on, her pulse hammering beneath the calm. She hated the tremor of relief that came with each step unbroken. Every inch of her composure was armor. At the edge of the dance floor, the Duke stood alone. His gaze followed her unreadable. The crowd seemed to part of its own accord, forming a corridor of silk and shadow between them. The orchestra shifted, a waltz she knew too well, the one he had once claimed as theirs. He moved forward. Lady Evelina. His voice, deep and deliberate, carried across the hush. Your Grace. A silence fell thick as snowfall. Every pair of eyes turned toward them. She expected mockery, perhaps pity. Instead, there was awe. The Duke of Ashbourne had not danced since his return to society. He extended his gloved hand. Would you grant me this dance? The world tilted. She wanted to refuse, to turn her back and remind him what his abandonment had cost. But the weight of the ballroom pressed upon her, 1,000 gazes urging her to stumble, to flee. Instead, she placed her hand in his. The music began. They moved together as though time had folded upon itself. His touch was steady, his scent faintly of cedar and rain. Every turn of the waltz pulled her closer to the memory she had sworn to bury, laughter beneath summer trees, his whispered vow that he would never leave her. "You should not have asked me," she said quietly, eyes fixed somewhere beyond his shoulder. "Perhaps not." "Then why?" "Because, my lady, I find that a year's silence has failed to quiet my conscience." Her breath caught, but she said nothing. Around them, the room blurred, gowns, chandeliers, and eyes fading into insignificance. Only the music remained, haunting and slow. "You made certain I would be despised," she murmured, her voice trembling despite herself. "I made certain you would be safe." "Safe?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "Do you imagine a woman's safety lies in being pitted?" He did not answer. His jaw tightened, and for an instant his mask slipped. She saw something raw flicker there, guilt, longing, perhaps both. The music swelled. He turned her, his hand firm at her waist, his breath close enough to stir the pearls at her throat. "Tell me, Your Grace," she whispered, "when you left me, did it cost you anything at all?" He hesitated just long enough. It was answer enough. The final note trembled into silence. The crowd erupted into cautious applause, polite but charged with curiosity. Evelina stepped back, curtsying with immaculate grace. Her heart pounded so violently she feared they could hear it. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You dance as flawlessly as ever." "And you," he replied, bowing low, "bear humiliation more beautifully than any woman I know." It was too cruel to be sincere, too sorrowful to be mockery. She could not tell which wounded her more. He turned and walked away. The crowd closed behind him like water, swallowing the space where he had been. Evelina stood motionless, the music beginning anew, her reflection caught in the mirror's gilt frame. Poised, lovely, untouchable. Only when no one watched did she let her fingers tremble, and from her palm she drew the smallest of things, a pressed white rose, crushed and hidden there since the waltz began. The same kind he had once given her a year ago, on the night he vanished. The room glittered, laughter swelled, and the snow outside fell thicker against the glass. But inside her chest, something ancient and unfinished stirred. A pain, a question, a pulse that refused to die. And when she looked again toward the far doorway, the Duke was watching her still, his gaze steady, unreadable, as if daring her to remember everything she had tried so hard to forget. The orchestra's final waltz dissolved into murmurs and the soft chime of crystal. Conversation drifted like perfume across the air, sweet and poisonous in equal measure. Lady Evelina Harcourt lingered at the edge of the ballroom, her breath shallow beneath the pearls at her throat. She could still feel his touch, the Duke's hand steady against her back, his voice low with things unsaid. The pressed white rose now hid within her fan, its faint scent teasing her resolve. Around her, the revelry blurred. Laughter clinked like glass, fans whispered like wings. Yet, beneath that polished din was something darker, curiosity sharpened to cruelty. The tun had scented a story, and stories were their true delight. Evelina turned toward the conservatory, where moonlight spilled through glass, and the air was cool with roses. She moved silently, her skirts trailing a faint shimmer across the marble. The garden beyond was silver and still. The world, for a blessed moment, hushed. She pressed a hand to her heart and tried to steady the wild rhythm within. Then she heard his footsteps. "Lady Evelina." The voice reached her before the man did, that deep, measured tone that could still undo her composure, with a syllable. She turned slowly. The Duke of Ashbourne stood half in shadow, his eyes unreadable, his posture perfectly still, as though carved from dusk itself. "You followed me," she said quietly. "I merely wish to return what is yours." He stepped closer and took her hand before she could retreat. The touch was brief, gloved against gloved, yet it sent a current through her that neither year nor pride could extinguish. When he withdrew, something small and cool rested in her palm. It was a silver locket, her locket, the same she had lost the night before he left her. For a moment, the world narrowed to the glint of metal against her skin. She opened it. Inside lay a pressed white rose, dry now, its petals fragile as memory, and beneath it a torn scrap of paper, the edges singed as though rescued from flame. The handwriting was his. She recognized it instantly, even in ruin. The fragment bore only a few words. "Forgive me, for I—" The rest was gone. Her breath trembled. "Where did you—" "It was returned to me," he interrupted softly, "by someone who thought it sentimental. You kept it—" He hesitated. "I could not burn what was already half-burnt." The words, quiet as they were, struck through her like a confession. Before she could speak again, a ripple of voices rose beyond the glass doors. Laughter, footsteps, the rustle of silk. Lady Cressida Vale entered the conservatory, accompanied by two gentlemen whose amusement sparkled as brightly as their waistcoats. "Ah, how poetic," Cressida said, her gaze sweeping the scene with triumphant delight. The Duke and Lady Evelina alone beneath the roses. How utterly restorative. Evelina's spine stiffened. "You mistake coincidence for impropriety, Lady Cressida." "Coincidence?" Cressida echoed with mock wonder. "How very innocent the word sounds, coming from you." She turned to the men, lowering her voice just enough that it would still carry. One must admire her courage, to suffer heartbreak so publicly, and yet seek consolation so swiftly. A flicker of fury crossed the Duke's face, but Evelina placed a hand against his sleeve, not affection, only restraint. "Let her speak," she murmured. "She feeds upon attention. Deny her the feast." Her composure, fragile but deliberate, only deepened Cressida's smirk. "Perhaps you are right, my dear. Some wounds heal best when displayed." She dipped a mock curtsy and withdrew, her laughter trailing like perfume. When they were alone again, Evelina let the mask drop. "You see what your silence bred. They have turned me into their pastime. I did what I thought necessary to spare you worse." "Then you misjudged the appetite of cruelty," she replied. "It does not sleep, it only hungers." He said nothing. The faint light from the chandeliers caught the strain in his jaw, the shadow beneath his eyes. She realized with a pang that guilt had aged him more than time. A footman appeared at the conservatory door, bowing awkwardly. "Forgive me, my lady, there's talk circulating. A letter, they say. From you." "For me?" Her tone was quiet, but the chill in it made the servant falter. "Yes, my lady. It was shown around. To some guests. It suggests," he hesitated, glancing uneasily at the Duke. "It suggests your affections were once offered elsewhere, to a gentleman of means." Evelina's lips parted, but no sound came. The Duke's expression darkened. "Who carries it?" he demanded. "I do not know, your grace. Only that Lady Cressida was seen reading it aloud near the gallery." The servant withdrew, leaving silence thick as frost. Evelina closed her locket and gripped it tightly, as if the cold metal could anchor her to sense. "She will destroy what little peace I have left," she whispered. "I will see to it," he said at once. "No," her voice sharpened. "You will not fight my battles, not again. Every time you intervene, you make me smaller in their eyes." His jaw tightened. "Would you rather I stand idle while they soil your name? I would rather you let me stand on my own." The words cost her dearly, but pride was the only dignity she could still command. The Duke inclined his head, though the tension between them thrummed like a drawn bow. When he spoke again, his voice was low, almost tender. "You have changed." "I had to," she said simply. "The woman you left would have begged. The woman who remains would rather burn." The air between them trembled with something unsaid, something that neither apology nor anger could express. For a fleeting instant, she wondered what might have happened if he had stayed, if love had not been strangled by silence and rumor. But the thought was too cruel to linger on. A bell sounded faintly in the distance, midnight striking across the snowbound estate. The music swelled again from the ballroom, cheerful and hollow. "Will you return?" he asked. "To the ballroom? To society?" She smiled faintly without warmth. "Society never forgets, your grace. It merely grows bored." He looked at her then, as though seeing her for the first time, not as the naive girl he had once courted, but as a woman tempered by humiliation and survival. There was admiration in his gaze, and regret that felt perilously close to longing. "Then allow me one small rebellion," he said quietly. Before she could ask what he meant, he bowed his head slightly and took her hand again. The gesture was formal, public, yet within it lingered the ghost of what they had been. He pressed his lips lightly to her gloved fingers, a fleeting touch that could have been decorum or devotion, and then turned away. By the time she collected herself enough to follow, he was gone. Only the faint scent of rain and cedar marked his passing. When Evelina returned to the ballroom, the crowd was electric with gossip. Faces turned, voices lowered. Cressida's laughter drifted from near the musician's dais, bright and poisonous. She caught fragments as she passed. A letter to Mr. St. Clair, offering her hand if the Duke refused. So desperate, poor thing. And yet she carries herself like a queen. Every word stung like glass, yet she did not falter. Her composure was the only armor she possessed, and she wore it beautifully. At the far end of the hall, a footman pressed something discreetly into her hand, an envelope sealed with dark wax. Her heart lurched. The seal bore her family's crest. She broke it open beneath the glow of the chandeliers. Inside was her own handwriting. Her letter, the one she had written to the Duke a year ago, begging him to tell her what she had done wrong, returned to her, torn and scorched at the edges. But there was more. Pinned to it was a note in an unfamiliar, elegant script. "Some words are better left burned, my lady, unless you wish them to burn you instead." The paper trembled between her fingers. Around her, laughter swelled and fell like the tide. Somewhere across the room, the Duke had reappeared, speaking with the host, his face composed but his eyes flicking to her again and again. Evelina folded the letter carefully and slipped it inside her locket beside the pressed rose. Her pulse was steady now, her mind cold and clear. The scandal had begun its climb, and she understood at last that the past had not returned to torment her by accident. Someone had summoned it. As she lifted her gaze across the ballroom, she met the Duke's eyes through the golden haze of candlelight. In that look, something passed, not love, not forgiveness, but recognition. Whatever fire had once consumed them was not yet extinguished. It had merely learned patience. And somewhere behind her, half buried beneath the music and laughter, came a whisper too low for anyone but her to hear. Lady Cressida's voice, soft as silk, murmuring to her companion. "Tomorrow, London will remember her name." The rain began before midnight, sweeping across the moors like a dark, restless tide. At Evermere Hall, the ballroom's music had dwindled into silence, and the last carriages had rolled away through the storm. But in the library, where the fire still burned low, Lady Evelina Harcourt stood trembling in the amber light, her gown shadowed with rain. She had come without invitation, drawn by something stronger than anger, and ached too long silenced. The room smelled of wood smoke and ink of solitude and sleepless nights. Shelves stretched into the gloom, the fire throwing restless light across portraits of long-dead Ashbournes. At the writing desk stood the Duke himself, one hand resting upon a decanter, the other at his temple. He did not turn when she entered, but his voice, low and controlled, reached her through the quiet. "I wondered how long you would wait." Her heart clenched. Wait for what, your grace? The next whisper? The next ruinous courtesy? He looked up then, and the years between them fell away. His eyes, gray as wet stone, met hers with the steady pain of a man who had lived too long with regret. "I thought you would come sooner," he said softly. Evelina stepped closer, the fire catching the pearls at her throat. "You returned a locket that was never yours to keep. You allowed my name to become a parlor amusement. Tell me, what more could you expect from me? Gratitude?" He exhaled, weary. "I expected nothing. I only hoped for the truth to find you, at last." "The truth," she repeated bitterly. "Is that what you call your silence?" A gust of wind rattled the panes. He moved from behind the desk, crossing the distance between them slowly, as if afraid she might vanish. "Silence was all that was left to me when lies were the only language around you." Her breath caught. "Lies?" He gestured toward the hearth, where the flames snapped softly. Letters forged in your hand, addressed to Lord St. Clair. Promises written in the same ink you used for me. They arrived the week before our engagement was to be announced. Each word a knife. Evelina went cold. That's impossible. I thought so, too. But they bore your seal, your signature, even the rhythm of your speech. I confronted your father. He swore ignorance, and yet his voice broke slightly. He begged me to let the matter end quietly. Said, your family could not withstand another scandal. I thought, God forgive me, I thought I was saving you. Her pulse thundered in her ears. By abandoning me? By removing myself from the scandal that was meant to destroy you, he said, his tone roughened by the memory. Had I exposed it, your name would have been dragged through every drawing room in London. I took the shame upon myself. I thought the world would turn its ridicule on me and leave you untainted. Evelina stared at him, the firelight flickering across the tears gathering in her eyes. You thought wrong, she whispered. He closed his eyes as though the words struck something already wounded. I see that now. For a long moment neither spoke. The storm beyond the windows grew heavier, sheets of rain lashing against the glass. The flames hissed and bent, throwing shadows like restless spirits along the bookshelves. Evelina moved to the hearth, her reflection trembling in the darkened glass. Who forged them, then? She asked finally. Who hated me enough to do this? His silence was answer enough. Cressida, she said, the name ablaze on her tongue. He nodded once. Her brother owed your father a considerable sum. The debt was erased the week after the letters appeared. A sob escaped her, soft and furious. And all this time I was the fool clinging to the memory of a man who vanished without explanation. I wanted to tell you, he said, voice low, but when I returned to London, you were gone. And when I heard the whispers that you had grown distant proud, I convinced myself it was better this way, that perhaps you had found peace in forgetting me. She turned to face him, eyes bright with unshed tears. Peace. She gave a trembling laugh. Do you know what peace looks like, Your Grace? It's learning how to curtsy to the women who pity you, how to laugh when men speak of virtue, how to sleep without dreams, because even dreams are cruel. He took a step closer. Then let me undo what I've done. It cannot be undone. His voice dropped to a plea. Evelina, Do not say my name, she interrupted sharply, her composure fracturing. You forfeited that right when you left me to drown in their whispers. The fire cracked, spitting sparks. He flinched as one landed near his hand, crushing it with his glove before it burned. I would have borne their scorn 100 times over, if it would have spared you this. Then why didn't you? He looked at her helplessly. Because I am a coward. The admission fell between them like confession before an altar. For the first time, he looked younger, stripped of title and pride, only a man standing before the wreckage of what he had loved. Evelina's anger faltered, leaving only exhaustion. She sank into a chair near the fire, pressing a trembling hand to her forehead. You let me hate you, she whispered. You let me think I was unworthy of even your disdain. I thought hatred might free you faster than the truth, he said, kneeling beside her. But I was wrong. It chained us both. The sound of rain softened, steady and mournful. He reached out, hesitated, then took her hand in both of his. The warmth of his touch undid her resolve. She did not withdraw. I never stopped loving you, he said quietly, even when I tried to. Her eyes met his, wide, uncertain, filled with the ache of every lost year. And yet you let me burn alone. He bowed his head, his voice a whisper against her wrist. If there is mercy left in you, let it be this. Believe that I loved you enough to destroy myself for it. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She wanted to tell him that she believed that the years had not killed what lay between them. But something within her, some remnant of pride or pain, held her still. The clock on the mantel struck once, shattering the silence. Outside, the wind howled anew. At last, she withdrew her hand gently from his grasp. You say you saved me, she murmured, but you never asked if I wished to be saved. He looked up, eyes shining in the firelight. What would you have had me do? Stay, she said simply. Even ruined, I would rather have faced the world beside you than endured its mercy alone. The words left her trembling, raw, exposed. For a moment he only stared, and she saw, in his expression, both wonder and despair. Then he rose, turning toward the window where the storm pressed its face against the glass. "Some damage cannot be undone," he said softly, "but it can be faced." Before she could answer, the door burst open. A servant, breathless, drenched from rain, stood in the threshold. "Your Grace," he gasped. "Lady Evelina, there are letters. Someone has taken her correspondence. They say it will be printed in the morning." The Duke's face hardened. Evelina's blood ran cold. "Who?" he demanded. But the servant only shook his head. "All London will know by dawn." The Duke turned back to Evelina, his expression fierce with resolve, his voice low and certain. "Then dawn must not find us idle." The fire flared suddenly, sparks leaping high, as if echoing the decision neither could yet speak aloud. And through the sound of rain and wind, Evelina felt it, the pulse of something returning, dark and unstoppable. Not love, not forgiveness, but the beginning of war. Music drifted through the ballroom like a spell cast against dread. The chandeliers burned brighter than usual, as though determined to blind London's gossips before they could see the ruin poised to unfold. Lady Evelina Harcourt stood near the edge of the marble floor, her gloved hands trembling around her fan. The orchestra swelled into a waltz, but the laughter that once thrilled her now rang false, a performance staged for survival. By morning, her letters would be everywhere. Every confession, every unguarded word to the Duke of Ashbourne would be inked across the scandal sheets. He entered as the violins rose, a tall figure in black, storm still clinging to his coat. The crowd turned, whispers darting like minnows through water. He did not bow nor smile. His gaze found her across the glittering expanse, and she knew, without a word, that he had come not to plead, but to fight. When he reached her, the dancers instinctively shifted, as if the air itself made way. He bowed, with immaculate precision. "Lady Evelina," he said, his voice low enough for her alone. "Your Grace." Her reply was steady, though her heart pounded with terror. "You should not be here." "Nor should you," he murmured, "but here we stand, two ghosts refusing their graves." She almost laughed, though nothing in her felt light. "If you mean to defend me, it is too late. The presses will not wait for dawn." He offered his hand. "Then let us give London something else to talk about before morning." Her breath caught. "A dance." "A declaration," he said simply, and before she could refuse, he led her to the center of the floor. The orchestra faltered for half a heartbeat, uncertain, then resumed with trembling resolve. The Duke placed his hand at her waist, his other entwining with hers. His touch was careful, reverent, but beneath it pulsed something fierce, an urgency neither could conceal. The waltz began. Around them, silk swirled and jewels flashed, but Evelina saw nothing except him. The rhythm drew them close, turning memory into motion. Each step was a conversation, every spin a confession the world was never meant to hear. "You mean to face them," she whispered as they turned. "I mean to end them," he replied, "and if the cost is everything." He met her gaze, his expression unflinching. "Then I will pay it gladly." The words struck through her like thunder. For years she had dreamed of vindication, of truth surfacing like dawn after endless night, but not like this. Not in a ballroom, filled with eyes that had watched her fall once before. "You will ruin yourself," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "I was ruined the day I lost you." The orchestra quickened, the waltz drawing them nearer until her breath mingled with his. "Do not do this for me," she whispered. "Do it for the truth." "I can no longer tell the difference," he said. The music swelled, carrying them through the blaze of chandeliers, through murmured disbelief rippling along the walls. She felt the tremor of his heartbeat beneath his glove, the weight of years dissolving in a single, reckless motion. At last, the final chord struck, a soft, shattering note that left the room suspended in silence. The Duke released her hand but did not step away. His voice carried, calm and steady, through the stunned quiet. "Forgive the intrusion," he began, turning toward the watching assembly. It seems I have arrived in time to correct an unfortunate misunderstanding. Evelina froze. Certain papers, he continued, intend to print a collection of letters tomorrow. Letters said to compromise the honor of Lady Evelina Harcourt. His tone was polite, almost conversational, but every word landed like a blow. Allow me to state plainly, those letters were written to me. They were stolen from my possession. If scandal exists, it belongs to my carelessness, not her character. Gasps scattered through the crowd. A few women clutched their fans, others leaned forward, eager for blood. Lord St. Clair's name slithered through the murmurs, but no one spoke it aloud. Evelina felt her pulse hammer against her ribs. You cannot, she began under her breath. He did not look at her. The lady is innocent, he said, his voice rising. If she is to be judged, then let her be judged for kindness, for faith undeserved, for grace offered to a man unworthy of it. The silence that followed was colder than the storm outside. Evelina found her voice, quiet but cutting. You have signed your own ruin. He turned toward her at last, and the world seemed to fade. Ruin is a small price for truth, he said, and for you. The orchestra began again, soft and hesitant, as if afraid to disturb what had been set loose. People began to murmur, to move. The dance resumed, but the room had shifted. The air itself seemed changed, charged with the knowledge that something sacred had been broken open before them. He stepped closer, his voice barely audible. Now they will come for me. The letters will still print, but their poison will be mine alone. You must leave before they— No, she said sharply. I will not hide. You must, he insisted. There are debts still owed for what was done. They will use you to reach me. Her chin lifted. Let them. I have been a shadow too long. The orchestra's music swelled again, and they stood unmoving amid the swirl of dancers. His expression wavered, caught between pride and despair. You deserve a quieter salvation than this, he murmured. Perhaps, she said, but quiet things rarely survive. Before he could answer, Lord St. Clair emerged from the crowd, face pale, jaw clenched. Ashbourne, he said, his voice tight with fury. A noble gesture, but misplaced. You speak as though the scandal concerns no one else. The Duke turned, his composure lethal in its calm. It concerns only me. St. Clair's mouth twisted. We shall see what the public thinks when they learn of the debt your family carries, when they see how desperation breeds confession. The Duke's eyes hardened. You mistake desperation for conscience. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Evelina stepped forward before the Duke could reply. Enough, she said, her voice slicing clean through the noise. If you mean to shame me, Lord St. Clair, you will have to do so with more than rumor. Speak plainly. St. Clair hesitated. The music faltered again. Dozens of faces turned toward them. But before he could answer, the doors at the far end burst open. A messenger, soaked from the rain, stumbled into the ballroom, clutching a sealed folio. For his grace, he stammered, breathless. The Duke took it, breaking the seal. As he scanned the page, the blood drained from his face. What is it? Evelina whispered. He looked up slowly, voice barely audible. The presses were burned, he said. Someone reached them first. The crowd murmured, bewildered. Who? She asked. But he only stared at the note again, eyes narrowing. There is no signature, he said softly. Only 3 words. The rose remembers. Evelina felt the air shift, colder now, edged with something foreboding. The chandeliers flickered once, the music fading into silence once more. Somewhere beyond the windows, thunder rolled low across the moors. The Duke met her gaze, his expression unreadable. It seems, he said quietly, our enemy has not finished with us after all. The rain came in torrents, striking the cobblestones with a fury that made the world sound like it was breaking apart. London's lamps burned weakly through the downpour, halos of gold drowned in gray. A single carriage waited outside Ashbourne House, its horses restless, steam rising from their flanks. Inside, the Duke sat alone, his gloves discarded, his jaw set with the stillness of a man awaiting sentence. Every secret, every sacrifice had brought him to this hour. The scandal had been smothered, But the silence it left behind was far more dangerous. The rose remembers. The words haunted him, no longer a warning but a vow. Somewhere beyond that rain, someone had intervened to save Evelina, and now they would demand repayment. A sharp knock struck the carriage door. He opened it without surprise. She stood there, drenched, shivering, her cloak heavy with rain, her face pale, but defiant. "You should not have come," he said quietly. "Nor should you be leaving," she replied, her voice trembling with cold and resolve alike. "You mean to vanish without a word, as you did before. I will not let it happen again." He looked away, the faintest ghost of anguish crossing his features. "If I stay, Evelina, you will lose everything that remains of your peace. They will come for me, and through me for you." "Then let them," she said fiercely. "I have endured their whispers. I will endure their vengeance. But I will not endure losing you again to your own pride." He laughed once, bitterly. "Pride? Is that what you call a man's last defense against ruin?" "No," she said, stepping closer until her skirts brushed his knees. "It is what I call fear dressed in dignity." For a long moment, the rain filled the silence between them. Lightning flashed across the windows, illuminating her eyes, bright, unyielding, alive with the same fire that had once undone him. "Why must you always fight for what the world will not allow you to keep?" he whispered. "Because," she said softly, "the world does not know how to love." He reached for her then, as if her words had unfastened something locked deep within him. But before his fingers could touch her face, the horses startled, hooves clattering against the stones. A second carriage appeared at the end of the lane, its lanterns darkened, its wheels cutting sharply through the rain. Evelina turned. "Who is that?" "The one who burned the presses," he said grimly. "They've come for the debt." The dark carriage halted. From it stepped a man in a long coat, Lord St. Clair, his expression shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. He approached slowly, his boots splashing through the puddles. "So noble," St. Clair said as he reached the door. "So willing to martyr yourself for a woman's name. Tell me, Ashbourne, was it worth it?" Evelina's chin lifted. "You lost, my lord. The scandal died before it was born." He smiled thinly. "Did it? I warned him. Truth is never so easily buried. You burned the words, yes, but not the hands that wrote them." He withdrew something from his coat, a single letter, sealed in crimson wax, the crest unmistakable. Her breath caught. It was her handwriting. "I kept one," St. Clair said, "for insurance." The Duke's voice was like steel. "You will hand it to me." St. Clair's eyes glinted. "And if I refuse?" The Duke stepped down from the carriage, rain soaking his hair, his coat clinging to his frame. "Then I shall take it." "Fool," St. Clair hissed. "You would strike a peer of the realm for her?" "Yes," the Duke said simply. The wind surged, catching the edges of their coats like wings. The moment hung suspended, thunder rumbling low, the city holding its breath. St. Clair's hand twitched toward his pocket. But before he could move further, Evelina stepped between them. "Enough," she said, her voice trembling but sure. "I will not let either of you drown in this madness. If it is my name that binds you, then let me unmake the bond." She reached for the letter. St. Clair hesitated, surprised by her boldness. She tore the seal before either man could stop her. The ink inside bled instantly as the rain struck it, her words dissolving into nothing. "There," she whispered. "Now none of us have anything left to weaponize." For a moment, only the sound of rain remained. St. Clair stared at the ruined letter, his rage flickering into something hollow. "You think that saves you," he said, his voice barely audible. "But it saves no one." He turned, disappearing into the storm. Evelina stood shaking, rain and tears indistinguishable on her cheeks. The Duke caught her as her strength faltered. "You should not have done that," he said, though his voice carried no reproach, only awe. "It was mine to destroy," she murmured. He drew her close, his breath unsteady. "I have no words left worthy of you." "Then say nothing," she whispered. "Just stay." They stood there beneath the torrent, two souls stripped of all pretense, the weight of the world reduced to the rhythm of the rain around them. The city beyond them was silent now, its judgment drowned beneath the storm. When at last he guided her into the carriage, she did not resist. He took the seat beside her, his hand finding hers in the dim light. The horses began to move, wheels cutting softly through the flooded streets. "Where will we go?" she asked quietly. "Anywhere that does not remember us," he said. Outside, the rain softened, turning from fury to grace. The carriage passed beneath the gaslights, their glow breaking through the mist like fragile hope reborn. Inside, her head rested against his shoulder, her hand still clasped in his. For the first time in a year, the Duke of Ashbourne allowed himself to breathe. As the carriage disappeared into the wet London night, the storm began to ease. Somewhere, a church bell told the hour, solemn, steady, and forgiving. And though the city would wake to rumors and ashes, no whisper could undo what had been mended in the rain. For love, once broken, had remembered itself.